You don't think it's going to be the last time, not when the kettle's whistling? And your cardigan still holds the scent of rosemary from the garden you trimmed yesterday. Not when the sun spills so politely through the lace curtains. You stitched by hand in 1986 with blue thread and a prayer. You think there is always more time, more laughter, more rooms to pass through. Carrying cups of tea, humming the tune that played at your wedding. I was standing in the hallway that morning, the hallway where the floor still creaks, just slightly near the umbrella stand, the one my late husband carved in walnut. I had set out the polished silver tray, the lemon cake I had baked with extra zest, and 3 clean mugs, all rimmed with a delicate gold I never dared put through the dishwasher. I'd even remembered to light the candle my daughter-in-law once. Complimented in passing, though it had taken me 3 tries to find it again. Because that day, my son promised he'd come. Not a vague suggestion or a murmured maybe. A promise. The date written down in my calendar with a little heart beside it. March 8th. Lunch with Martin. It's possible good news. I'd written in my favorite blue pen. I underlined it twice. He had said, "I want to talk about the house, Mom. We have some ideas." And when he said we, I pictured something gentle. I pictured Martin and his wife Lily, sitting across from me at the old table with the chipped corner, talking about renovations, maybe something that would make it easier for me to live alone. Maybe a ramp for the back steps or smart lights, so I wouldn't stumble again reaching for the switch at night. I'd read about those in the magazine they left behind one Sunday. I dared to believe this was kindness. I swept the kitchen 3 times that morning, moved the potted fern a few inches to the left so it wouldn't look too thirsty, re-ironed the table runner that only I ever saw, and when the doorbell rang late, but not unreasonably so, I folded my hands like a child at her school recital and opened the door with a smile I had been practicing in the mirror. Martin stepped in first, taller than I remembered. Grayer, yes, but not softened by it. He didn't meet my eyes right away. Lily followed, wearing one of those pressed jackets that always made me feel underdressed in my own home. I offered them tea. They said no. I pointed toward the living room, the one with the fireplace where Martin had hung his Christmas stocking every year until he was 21. He said he preferred to talk in the kitchen. I nodded and led them back to the place that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and floor polish. That there were no hugs, no cake slices served, just papers pulled from a sleek black folder. And a tone in my son's voice I hadn't heard since the day he told me he was moving out. Calm, professional, a touch too brisk. He spoke about maximizing the value of assets and setting up a trust and streamlining your living situation. I kept nodding, not understanding. Then, with his hands folded the way his father used to do when giving me hard news, he said, "You've had a good run in this house, Mom, but maybe it's time to think about what's next." I remember blinking because what he really said was that I had had enough time, as though time were something portioned out in teaspoons, as though I had overdosed on comfort, and now the cost was due. But I didn't cry. Not yet. I asked them if they'd like to stay for lunch. The cake was fresh. The eggs were farm still, warm when I picked them up that morning. They both glanced at each other, then at their phones. "We have to get back," Lily said. "We're meeting the architect at 4. An architect. They had already drawn lines where my memories lived. Rooms sketched out not in warmth or fragrance, but in potential resale value. Still, I stood on the porch after they left. I didn't scream. I didn't crumble. I stood there, staring at the lavender bush blooming out of season, and I whispered to myself, "They mean well. They just don't see it from where I'm standing." I told myself that a mother's love doesn't come with terms and conditions, that maybe they were trying to help. Maybe this was their way of showing care in contracts and consultations, not casseroles and conversations. So I waited for a follow-up call. A softer conversation, a revised plan. I waited for Martin to remember the birthday cards I used to draw by hand. For Lily to remember how I held her mother's hand at the funeral and made her tea every morning for a week. I waited. Because I believe the best in them. Because love, when you've carried it for decades, doesn't just turn off like a switch. It's layered in things the way I still bought Martin's favorite cereal in case he dropped by. The scarf I knitted for Lily that still sat in the hallway basket, never worn, never returned. The house was still mine then, the air still familiar. I cleaned the windows the next day, told myself they just don't know how to talk about emotions. Maybe this is hard for them too. But I caught myself that evening, standing in the hallway, hands on the railing, staring down the staircase like I used to when Martin was a teenager. Waiting for him to come home late. Only now, I was the one staying. Up for someone who had already left. The candle on the tray had gone cold. The lemon cake sat, its glaze hardening. I wrapped the silver tray in a clean dish, towel, and slid it back into the cabinet. I sat down in my armchair, the one where I once rocked Martin to sleep and listened to the silence of a home that had once been full. Hope isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the way you fold a napkin. It's the way you turn on the porch light a little early. The way you leave the door unlocked, just in case they've changed their mind. But that night, for the first time, I locked the door, not because I was angry, because I was starting to wonder if hope had become a kind of waiting room. And maybe I had been sitting in it too long. There's a peculiar silence that doesn't come all at once. It arrives slowly, like dust in corners you forgot to sweep, the kind you only notice when the sun hits just right. 1 week without a call feels normal. Life gets busy. 2 weeks, and you begin to wonder. A month passes, and you hear your own voice echoing when you say something aloud to no one at all. I used to hear from Martin every Sunday. That was our ritual. After church, I'd come home, change into my robe, make a cup of Darjeeling, sit by the phone with the paper open in front of me. It was nothing elaborate. Sometimes he'd just say, "Hey, Mom, I've got 5 minutes." And I'd treasure those 5 minutes, like they were gold coins placed in the palm of a poor woman. But after that meeting, the one with the black folder and the word architect floating like an arrow in my chest, the calls stopped at first. I thought maybe he was giving me space. Maybe he felt bad. Maybe Lily had talked to him and said, "You were too blunt with her." And now he was sitting by his phone, unsure how to fix it. But days turned to weeks. When I called, it went to voicemail. Not even the kind you can leave a message on. Just that automatic one. The robotic woman saying the number wasn't available. Once I left a message anyway, rambling into the digital void. "Hi, Martin. Just making sure everything's all right. I have some of those pear preserves you like. They're in the pantry if you and Lily want to swing by." I hung up before I could say I miss you. The house began to hum differently without his voice in it. My hands still worked, folding, cleaning, cooking, but my mind, it wandered. To memories mostly. It's the kind you don't dust off often, 'cause they feel too fragile. Martin used to sit at the kitchen table with his elbows planted firm, his chin in his hands waiting for the pancakes I'd flip on that old griddle. He liked them almost burnt, the way I never understood but always did anyway. On snow days, I'd let him stay in his pajamas until noon. And he'd build towers from cereal boxes while I wrote grocery lists. I remember how he used to hum when he was thinking, just this low, tuneless hum. He used to drive his father mad. Now I missed it like you miss breath when you're underwater too long. One morning, I walked into the kitchen and realized something had shifted. The calendar page still read April, but it was June. Somehow, time had moved on without me. I stood there, staring at it. Easter passed, spring passed, and not a word from my son. Not even a card on Mother's Day. That hurt more than anything. I hadn't expected flowers, but a call, a line, even a cold scheduled text. "Happy Mother's Day." That would have been enough to keep me from crying over the sink while I washed the same cup 3 times. Instead, I sat in the garden alone, wearing the perfume Martin gave me years ago, the one with the lilac label I only wore on special days. I made tea for 2, then poured the second cup down the drain. Lily didn't call either. She had once hugged me tightly at her bridal shower and said, "I'm so lucky to have a second mom like you." I'd crocheted her a blanket that winter, pale blue and cream, and wrapped it in the same tissue paper I'd saved from my own. Wedding now, I imagined it folded in the back of a linen closet, or worse, given away. Like me. That's how it starts, the quiet removal of you. First, it's the calls, then the visits. Then it's things like forgetting you used to bake them a birthday pie instead of cake because they preferred the crust. They forget which drawer held the spoons. They forget how your hands once steadied them when they were sick. They forget. You all together, I'd go to the church every Sunday, still wearing my good coat even when the weather turned warm. Because somehow I thought if I kept showing up, God would take pity and hand me back my family. People started to ask about Martin. Have they come to visit recently, dear? And I'd lie politely. Oh yes, they're just busy, you know. Because you can't say, my son has quietly placed me in the attic of his life, can you? You can't tell people that your phone hasn't rung in 2 months, that your pantry still holds snacks he liked, but no one comes to eat, that your nights are filled with dreams where he's 12 again and you can't reach. Kim, no matter how fast you run. I tried to keep busy. I cleaned out the sewing cupboard, thinking I might make new curtains for the guest room. I made soup and froze it in labeled containers. I even started writing a letter, not to send, just to get the words out. I wrote, I love you still, even in silence, but I don't know who I'm loving anymore. I tore it up after the first paragraph. There was one afternoon, mid-July, when the doorbell rang and I nearly wept. My hands shook as I walked down the hall. I thought, he's come. He remembered. It was a delivery man. A box of vitamins I hadn't ordered. I signed, smiled, and closed the door before he could see the tears. That night, I didn't turn on the porch light. I think part of me was tired of pretending I was waiting. And still, every morning I checked my phone, scrolled through missed calls. Nothing. Once I thought I heard it ring while I was trimming the rose bush. I ran inside, nearly slipping. But it had just been the neighbor's ringtone through an open window. That kind of hope wears you down. The false alarms, the almosts. But you keep reaching, because that's what mothers do. We reach, even when our hands come back empty. We listen, even when there's only silence. And sometimes, we smile through the fog of being slowly, gently, completely forgotten. Not because we're weak, but because we remember what they looked like when they still needed us and we haven't yet figured out how to stop needing that feeling in return. There are quiet betrayals, not the kind you see in movies. No dramatic slam of a door, no shouting match in the rain. Just a soft unraveling, a thread pulled gently. So slowly you don't notice the shape of your life is changing until the whole garment falls apart. It started with a bank statement, not the usual one, not the envelope I'd been receiving for decades, crisp beige, printed on that matte paper that always smelled faintly like cardboard and ink. No, this one came by email. I almost deleted it, thinking it was junk. But something about the subject line caught my eye. Activity notification, large transfer alert. I hadn't set up alerts. I stared at the email on the screen. The amount, nearly 5 figures, was missing from one of my sub-savings accounts. The one labeled Future Projects. I had opened it quietly after Harold passed, telling myself I might renovate the sunroom. Or maybe take that trip to the Scottish coast we'd dreamed about but never managed to take. I'd never touched it, not once. Now it was gone. I sat there, at the kitchen table, the glow of the laptop reflecting on my glasses, the ticking of the wall clock louder than ever. My tea had gone cold beside me. I scrolled down. The transfer had been made 2 weeks prior, not by check, not by debit card. An online authorization, one I didn't remember giving. I don't consider myself a fool. I may not know every trick these new systems play, but I've never handed out my information carelessly. I still write grocery lists on paper, still balance my checkbook with a pen. So when I saw my own name attached to a transfer I hadn't approved, my stomach folded in on itself. I called the bank. waited 22 minutes to speak to a real person. The young man on the line sounded polite, almost cheerful. I tried to match his tone, though my voice trembled slightly as I asked, "Can you tell me who accessed my account?" He hesitated. "It appears the transfer was made from a recognized device on iPad registered under your family sharing account." "Don't own an iPad." "But Martin does, and my name," I remembered suddenly, "had been used when they first set up their joint account. Something about needing a second guarantor back when they applied for their first mortgage." "Just paperwork," Martin had said. "You won't ever be liable, it's just for approval." I'd signed without reading it all. I trusted him. He was my son. I asked the man at the bank if the transfer could be reversed. He said no. The funds were already dispersed. What were they used for? I asked another pause. "Then we aren't able to disclose purchases, ma'am, unless you're the account owner." I ended the call with my hands shaking. That night, couldn't sleep. I sat by the window and stared out at the garden, the hydrangeas glowing pale in the moonlight. A part of me wanted to believe this was a mistake, a mix-up. Maybe they needed the money for something urgent. Maybe they meant to ask me but forgot. Maybe it was a loan. Yes, a loan they just hadn't mentioned. But then came the second blow. It was a Wednesday. The air was thick with early August heat, and I was scrolling through Facebook checking on the church bulletin board. That's when I saw it. A photo. Posted by one of Lily's friends. It was Martin and Lily standing in front of a sleek, glass-fronted building with gold accents and black stone stairs. The caption read, "So excited for our next chapter. The new house is finally ours." Hashtags followed. Hashtag dream home, hashtag finally moved, hashtag design goals, . I blinked, looked again, zoomed in. The background wasn't familiar. Not the modest neighborhood they used to live in. This was newer, bigger. The kind of house with smart locks, waterfall counters, and ambient lighting in the hallways. My stomach dropped. So this was their next chapter. They had bought a new home, with my money, the architect meeting, the quiet phone calls, the paperwork and polite distance. It had all been part of something bigger. A plan that had no room for me in it. I stared at the photo until my vision blurred. It wasn't just the house that hurt. It was the smiles on their faces, joy without guilt, celebration without consequence. And there, in the comments, Lily's mother had written, "So proud of you both. All your hard work paid off." Their hard work, not a single mention of me. Not the woman who had packed Atin's lunches every day for 12 years, who had sewn his Halloween costumes from scratch, who had dipped into her savings to help them with the down payment on their first condo. I sat frozen. The screen illuminated my face in the dark. It wasn't the money, it was the deceit. I could have given it freely. I could have written them a check, smiling, if they had only said, "Mom, we're struggling. We want a home. We need help." They didn't ask. They took. Quietly, casually, confidently, because they thought, I wouldn't notice. Because they thought I didn't matter enough to be included. I looked around my own house, the one they had said I'd had enough time in. My rooms were smaller now, my walls closer, air heavier. I saw my own life shrinking, not because of age or health or ability, but because someone else decided I didn't deserve the space anymore. I didn't cry that night. I folded the laptop, turned off the light, sat in the stillness, and let the truth settle, like silt at the bottom of a glass. They had moved on, not just from the house, but for me. And somewhere along the way, they had rewritten the story of us with themselves, as the heroes and me as the afterthought. A line I had written in my torn-up letter echoed back to me like a whisper. "I love you still, even in silence. But I don't know who I'm loving anymore." That was the night something inside me shifted. Not rage, not grief, not even heartbreak. Just the quiet, steady click of a lock turning in my chest, the beginning of the end of who I had been to them, and the very first breath of who I was about to become. There's a certain way. You brace yourself for a conversation you never wanted to have. You don't do it all at once. Starts in your stomach, that low, tight knot that forms while you're folding towels or reheating last night's soup. Then it travels to your hands, making them restless, looking for something to hold. Finally, it settles in your chest, not anger, but a kind of ache, won't go away unless you speak. I rehearsed the words a dozen times before I said them. Standing at the kitchen sink, washing a mug Martin gave me years ago that said, "World's best mom" in chipped blue paint, I whispered into the quiet. I saw the post. I saw the house. And I saw what you did with my money. But I didn't call him. Not at first. I waited 2 more days. Told myself maybe he would call me. Maybe there was a reason. Maybe there would be an apology, or even just an acknowledgement. Something small to prove that the connection between us hadn't frayed beyond recognition, but no call came, so I dialed. When his voice finally answered, sounded like I'd caught him mid-meeting or mid-something, clipped. Distracted double quotes, "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" That question, "everything okay?" felt like a joke. It's like asking a tree if it's fine after you've chopped off its roots. I kept my voice even. I saw the picture, the new house, a pause, a quiet intake of breath. I also saw the bank, transfer, the savings account, the one I never touched. Longer pause this time. Then, in a voice too casual to be innocent, he said, "Oh, that. Just that. As if he'd misplaced a pair of socks, not nearly emptied an account meant. For the only real dream I had left, I never gave permission. I said, still calm. My hand clutched the edge of the counter to keep steady. "You took what wasn't yours?" he sighed. "The way people sigh when they're inconvenienced. It's not like that, Mom. You always said the money was for the family." "I am family." I replied. Silence. Then came the shift, subtle but sharp. "The way ice cracks beneath your feet, I thought you'd be proud," he said. "We didn't want to stress you out with the details." Proud. As if betrayal wrapped in pretty photos and marble countertops could be pride-worthy. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I just asked the question that had been living in my chest like a trapped bird. "Why didn't you tell me?" Martin's voice hardened. "Honestly, because you get emotional. Every time we try to have a serious conversation, you twist it. It's like it's always about you." It was the quiet assassination of my character. "You're being dramatic," he added. "It's not like we stole from you, but they had. It's not just money, they had stolen trust, my place, my sense of belonging. And now they wanted me to believe that the pain I felt was some kind of overreaction." I remembered the Christmas Martin was 8 and broke a neighbor's window with a snowball. I stood beside him, coatless in the cold, as he apologized with red cheeks and trembling hands. I had taught him about consequences, about kindness, about owning mistakes. And now here he was, grown, successful, and quietly cruel. Gaslighting. The woman who raised him, he kept talking. Something about simplifying responsibilities. Something about how we were going to loop you in. Then Lily's voice appeared in the background. Muffled, but sharp. "Just tell her she's being unfair. We did this for her, too. For me, I thought of my quiet afternoons in this house, alone. The meals cooked for one. The silence where Sunday calls used to live. The ghost of my husband's voice humming while fixing the back gate. They hadn't done this for me. They had done it despite me. Without me, I'm not being unfair," I said quietly. "I'm being erased." He laughed, short, awkward. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't be so." I cut him off. "No, listen." Her voice was low, steady. Years of motherhood had taught me how to make silence louder than any shout. "You took my money. You planned a future I wasn't invited to. You've ignored my calls. You've left me out of holidays, birthdays, even conversations about my own home. You didn't ask. You didn't include. And now you say I'm the one making it about me." Didn't answer. "I was never dramatic," I added. "I was devoted." There was a long silence on the other end. Then, like someone placing a final nail in a coffin, He said the words I will never forget. "You've had a good run, Mom, but things are different now. You're not central anymore. You've done your part. Done my part." Like a character written out of a story once the plot moved on. I didn't speak again. He ended the call with something hollow. "We'll talk soon," though we both knew we wouldn't. I sat in the quiet kitchen. After that, the refrigerator humming in the background. I looked around the room where I had once fed him mashed carrots and kissed scraped knees and taught him how to tie his shoes, and I understood fully what I had become to them. A burden, not a person, not a history, not a foundation. To be minimized, a cost to be managed. A room in a house they wanted emptied. I pressed my palm flat on the kitchen counter, felt the coolness of the stone. I used to think love was a kind of shield, something that would protect you, soften the edges of life. But in that moment, I understood something new. Love, even the deepest, most unconditional kind, can be rewritten by people who stop seeing you. And once you are invisible, you are disposable. I walked upstairs that night and opened the drawer in my desk. Inside were the documents I'd ignored for years, the deed, the will, the passwords, the accounts. I placed them on the desk and I sat down because if I was no longer part of their future, then they would no longer be entitled to the parts of me they had taken for granted. There's a stillness that comes after clarity. Not peace, not yet. But a kind of steady silence, the kind that arrives when you've finally accepted what someone will never give you, and you stop asking for it. After that call with Martin, I stopped waiting for the apology. It was never coming. Instead, I opened every drawer they thought I'd never open. I reached for every file they assumed I had forgotten. The pink folder with the mortgage deed, still neatly labeled in Harold's handwriting. The thick brown envelope marked estate planning, 2007, the bank ledger. The notarized agreement from years ago when I'd quietly paid off the last of Martin's student loans because he and Lily were expecting their first child. If I wanted them to start fresh. I didn't cry while doing it. I flinched. It felt like sorting through the bones of a life that had outgrown the people in it. Like closing the front door for the last time, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I booked an appointment with a lawyer named Adrienne. I picked her name from the back of a local magazine, not because I knew her, but because her ad said, "Protect what matters." That phrase stayed with me. The receptionist was surprised I'd brought everything in paper folders, not scanned. I smiled politely and said, "Some things are meant to be touched." Adrienne was sharp and kind in equal measure. She wore a navy dress with pearl buttons and listened more than she spoke. I liked her instantly. "I want to revise my will," I told her. She nodded. "What changes would you like to make?" I didn't answer right away. I pulled a photo from my purse and placed it on the desk. It was of my granddaughter, Nora, 7 years old. Soft brown curls and a smile with one missing tooth. I hadn't seen her in nearly a year. Not because I didn't try, but because I was no longer part of the schedule. "I want everything to go to her," I said, "when she's older. Not her parents. Not as a trust they control. I want her to have what they never earned." Adrienne didn't blink, just nodded again. "We can absolutely do that." Next came the property, the house they thought I was only borrowing, the home they quietly began designing without me in. "I'd like to sell it," I said. Adrienne raised an eyebrow. "Do you have somewhere else you're planning to go?" "I have ideas," I replied, calm as ever. "But first I want to sell it on my terms. No open house, no family notice, quietly, privately." She recommended a realtor who specialized in discreet listings, a woman named Rosa, with kind eyes and no time for nonsense. I liked her too. We met 3 times, walked through each room. Rosa asked me what mattered more, the price or the process. "Dignity," I said. "I'm not chasing every dollar. I just want it handled with dignity." The listing never went public. She found a buyer within 3 weeks, a widow like me, younger by a decade, with a love for old gardens and a promise to keep the rose bush alive. The papers were signed. On a Thursday, I didn't tell Martin. The sale proceeds went into a new account. One with no co-signers, no family sharing. It's just my name. I felt something settle in my bones that day. Not triumph, not revenge. Something quieter, ownership. It's strange. Strange the way a woman can live her whole life inside walls she doesn't truly own until she decides to. With the sale underway, I began making space. I donated bags of linens I no longer needed. Cookware. My second set of dishes. I gave away books I had read and reread, keeping only the ones that still spoke to me in the quiet. I folded my life into boxes not because I was being forced to, but because I had chosen to. One night, I sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had once served Martin spaghetti with cut-up hot dogs, where Lily had opened her baby. Shower gifts, where birthdays had been celebrated with noise and candles. I sat there with a cup of tea and a new notebook. The pages were blank, but I wasn't. I made lists, not of regrets, of possibilities. Where might I go next? A smaller town, a garden cottage, maybe even a senior cope where people share meals and stories, and no one expects you to stay quiet. Unless spoken to, I wrote down names of old friends I hadn't seen in years. A woman named Helen from the church sewing group, a neighbor I used to exchange soup with during winters. I wondered who still remembered me. Who might still care if I called? Then I wrote Nora's name in the middle of the page, not because I planned to interfere, but because I wanted to build something for her. A small seed. Something that would wait quietly until she was old enough to find it and wonder why. I packed away the framed family photo from 2002, the one where we all looked happy. I didn't throw it away, but I didn't keep it in view either. Some memories aren't lies. They're just unfinished stories. And sometimes have to stop rereading them and start writing something new. By the end of the month, the house no longer felt like mine. And that was the strangest part of all. The freedom didn't come with grief. It came with lightness. I felt like I had taken my name back. It's my silence back. My years back. I didn't tell Martin. Not yet. I didn't need him to know, because this wasn't about him anymore. Or Lily, or their new house with the smart lights and marble stairs. This was about a woman they had underestimated. A woman they thought would quietly disappear. But instead, I'd quietly reclaimed every room, every dollar, every inch of my future, without raising my voice, without slamming a door, and without letting them see the power in my stillness. They wanted to inherit my house. What they didn't realize was I had already inherited something greater. Myself. When people think of disappearing, they imagine something dramatic. Bags packed in the night, tires skidding down a gravel road, a note on the counter curled at the edges from tears. But my vanishing wasn't like that. It was quiet, intentional, almost invisible, like mist lifting from a field before dawn. There one moment, and then, the day I moved out, the house didn't cry. The walls didn't beg me to stay. I didn't leave a forwarding address. The buyer, a kind widow named Bernice, offered to let me leave a few things in the attic until I settled somewhere. I thanked her and declined. Nothing I owned belonged to the past anymore. Not even the casserole dishes with faded red handles. Not even the rocking chair Harold had fixed again and again until it finally stopped creaking. I gave that one to a young couple down the street. They were expecting their first child. The woman had said, "It's beautiful." I had smiled, but didn't say that it had rocked 3 generations and held more sorrow than it ever let on. I didn't tell Martin I was going. I had no obligation to. And for the first time in my life, that truth felt like a gift. I moved into a small apartment on the edge of town, a building tucked behind a library, where the windows let in generous light and the neighbors say good morning like they mean it. I chose it because it was quiet, but not lonely. There's a bird feeder outside my window. I named the blue jay that visits every day, Walter. The woman next door, Fran, is 72 and swears by daily walks and crossword puzzles. She invited me to join her for coffee the second week. I brought lemon cookies. She told me I had kind eyes. No one here knows who I used to be in my family. No one here has ever said the word burden. My phone rang twice the first week after I left. Both calls from Martin. I didn't answer. He didn't leave a voicemail. By the third call, I blocked the number. It took me 3 tries. My hands were shaking, not from doubt, from release. It's strange what people feel entitled to after they've taken too much. They take your silence as permission, your generosity as agreement, your endurance as weakness. But silence can be sharper than any reply, and absence, when chosen, is a powerful inheritance. They didn't notice I was fading until I was gone. That's always the way of it. I've changed the locks on every account. Opened a new one at a smaller bank where the teller wears perfume that smells like gardenias and calls me miss. I got a new number, a new email, a new P.O. box. I let the old ones fade like leaves on a branch I no longer tended. I didn't check social media. I didn't look at their updates. I didn't want to know if they missed me, 'cause I finally understood they hadn't lost me. I had let them go. And it wasn't revenge. Not really. It was survival. There was a day, 2 months in, when I heard from a mutual acquaintance, a woman from church who hadn't seen me in a while. She mentioned, casually, that Martin and Lily were trying to get in touch. Something about a misunderstanding. Something about wanting to reconnect. I smiled softly and said, "I'm doing well, thank you." Because what is there to reconnect to, when the cord was cut by hands that never thought you'd notice? I walk now in the mornings, early, before the town wakes up. I breathe in the smell of bakery bread and wet sidewalks. Sometimes I buy a single flower at the corner stall, a daisy, a lily, a carnation, just one. I place it in a small glass vase near the window and watch it open quietly. That's how I feel. Not blooming, exactly. But opened one evening, I sat on my new porch with Fran and a few other women from the building. Someone mentioned family, grandkids, holidays. Everyone shared stories, laughter, pictures. I listened. I smiled. When it came to me, I simply said, I used to be needed in ways that weren't good for me. No one pressed. They just nodded, like they understood. Like maybe they, too, had once been rooms in someone else's house. Rooms that were walked through, used, forgotten. And now, here we were. Whole buildings of our own. There was a kind of grace in it. Every now and then I write letters to Nora, my granddaughter. I don't send them. I just write. Tell her things about our family she might never hear otherwise. About how her grandfather once made a snow angel in the front yard and laughed until he cried. About how her father used to sleep with a flashlight under his pillow. About how her grandmother once found the strength to leave a life that had outgrown her, and how that wasn't sad. It's just necessary. I seal each letter in a white envelope, tuck it into a small box. One day, maybe, she read them. But even if she never does, I know I left behind something better than bitterness. Truth, my vanishing wasn't about escape. It was about reappearance somewhere no one expected. Somewhere peaceful. Somewhere where I could finally exist without being edited. In silence. That beautiful, terrible silence they once forced me into had become my reply. My border, my home. A year passes faster than you'd think. Not because time flies in joy, but because when you stop waiting for people who no longer see you, the clock begins ticking differently. Softer, quieter, more honestly. I wake up now when I want to. Not from loneliness. Just from morning light. There's a tree outside my new window that blooms in yellow. Not gold, not lemon, something in between. I've never known its name. I simply call it mine. My days are ordinary, but they fit me. I go to the market on Tuesdays. There's a little booth run by a woman named Rima, who sells fresh bread with a crust that cracks perfectly when torn. She tells me about her teenage daughter. I nod. I don't say much. Just smile and mean it. In the evenings, I take my tea outside. Same mug every time. A chipped one with lavender on the side from a roadside shop Harold and I stopped at 30 years ago. The crack doesn't leak. That's how I know it's still good, so am I. Last week, I stood in front of the mirror and touched my face gently. Not to smooth it, not to wish it back to what it was, just to say hello. I have gray now, not just in my hair but in my way of seeing. Less black and white. Less should and more maybe. The world is softer when you stop trying to be the center of someone else's. A letter arrived, not from Martin, from Nora. Just a card, really. One of those children's note cards with a smiling sun in the corner and the words, "Hi, Grandma," scrawled across the top in purple marker. There were 5 lines in crooked writing. "I miss your cookies. I found one of your scarves. Ah, it smells like flowers. Mom says you're traveling. I hope you're happy. I love you." I read it sitting on the floor. Not because the chair wasn't close, but because grief and grace sometimes pull you to your knees in the same breath. I didn't cry, but I pressed the card to my chest like it was breathing. There are some doors that stay closed. Martin never wrote. I imagine he still tells himself stories that make it easier to live with what he did, that I was confused, that I overreacted, that he did the best he could. I don't need to argue with his version, because healing doesn't require vindication. It requires distance and honesty. And the courage to love yourself louder than the people who once whispered your worth away. One evening, a neighbor's grandson visited the building. He was no more than 25. He offered to carry my groceries. I let him. He called me ma'am until I told him not to. I don't want to be a relic to anyone, just a woman. Oh, and present. You live here alone? He asked kindly. I looked around at the ivy climbing the porch rail, the wind chime made from old spoons, the shelf of unread library books inside. Yes, I said, and not a single room is missing. That night, I set the dinner table for 1 cloth napkin, proper fork, glass of water with a lemon wedge, not because anyone was watching, but because I deserved a table that honored me. I always had. I think we spend much of our lives waiting for someone to tell us we matter. But the truth is, the most powerful thing you'll ever hear is the sound of your own voice saying, "I still do." The world outside my window has changed in 100 tiny ways since I arrived. There are fewer leaves now, more wind. A new family moved in, 2 units over a mother with twins. I hear laughter again in the hallway. The sound doesn't ache anymore, just echoes. Sometimes I leave a jar of preserves by their door. Number. No, just kindness, quiet and unassuming. It's the way love is supposed to be. I still write to Nora, just once a month now. I don't know if they'll ever reach her, but that's not the point. The point is, she'll know one day that someone remembered her completely, without agenda, without shame. I've left instructions with Adrienne, my lawyer. When Nora turns 18, she received the letters, the savings, the stories. The scarf she mentioned in her card, I've kept it. Folded gently in a box that smells faintly of lavender and thyme, she'll learn. If no one tells her first that her grandmother loved her more than anything, and she'll see through every envelope and every dollar I redirected that love can be both tender and fierce. As for Martin and Lily, I don't know what their life looks like now. I haven't searched my silence, my disappearance. It was never about punishment. It was about choosing myself in the quiet. They said I'd had enough time in that. House. What they didn't understand was the house was never the gift. I was, and now without them, I am finally home. Final line outside my window. The yellow blossoms lean toward the sun, not because someone told them to, but because they were always meant to. Asterisk.